Benedictine monks in medieval England took a vow of abstinence from meat. So they decided that beaver was fish. Officially, the Pope agreed. Beaver could be eaten on fast days because it lived in water. By the same logic, puffin, barnacle goose, and in some monasteries, rabbit. The puffin lived near water, close enough. The barnacle goose was believed to hatch from barnacles rather than eggs, which technically made it not meat by medieval biological standards. The rabbit was a borderline case that different monasteries resolved differently depending on how hungry they were and how creative their abbot was willing to be. This is medieval monastic dietary theology. It is also the most impressive loophole in the history of religious observance. And it tells you everything you need to know about what was actually happening in the monastery kitchen. The medieval monastery was not a place of quiet contemplation and simple living, not the kitchen anyway. A large English Benedictine monastery in 1200, Canterbury, Durham, Ely, was an institution of considerable size, complexity, and appetite. Canterbury Cathedral Priory housed approximately 150 monks. Each of them needed to be fed multiple times a day. They also fed guests. Medieval monasteries had a religious obligation of hospitality. Pilgrims, travelers, the poor, and the wealthy all had a claim on monastic food. On feast days, Canterbury fed hundreds of people. The kitchen that produced this food was not a small room with a single fire. It was an industrial operation with multiple hearths, specialist staff, dedicated storage facilities, and a supply chain that stretched across the monastery's agricultural estates. The kitchen staff worked 6 days a week. On the 7th day, they rested. The food did not rest. Bread needed to bake, ale needed to ferment. Someone worked on Sunday. That someone was usually the youngest and lowest-ranking kitchen worker who had not yet accumulated the seniority to avoid Sunday duty. Welcome to the monastery kitchen. It starts at 4 in the morning. The Rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century, governed what monks ate with considerable specificity. 2 cooked dishes at the main meal, 1 pound of bread per day, no meat from 4-legged animals except for the sick. That last rule was the one that generated all the creativity. Fish was permitted, eggs were permitted, dairy was permitted, anything that could be argued into the category of not 4-legged land animal was, with sufficient theological ingenuity, potentially on the menu. Medieval monks were not stupid people. They were, in fact, the most educated people in England. They applied their considerable intellectual resources to the question of what they were allowed to eat with the same rigor they applied to biblical commentary. The results were impressive. By the 12th century, the Benedictine table included fish in bewildering variety, eggs prepared in dozens of ways, cheese that would not be replicated until the industrial era, and a category of aquatic mammals that a strict reading of the rule would not have recognized as fish, but that a creative reading could accommodate. The beaver. Always the beaver. Your day in the monastery kitchen begins before the monks wake up. The monks wake up at 2 in the morning for the first prayer service. You wake up before that. The fires need to be lit before the monks need hot water for washing after matins. The bread needs to be started before breakfast. Breakfast is before prime, which is before terce, which is before the main meal at noon, which needs to be ready when the monks finish the morning's work and prayer. The monastery day is organized around 8 prayer services. The kitchen day is organized around feeding people between those 8 prayer services. The kitchen staff does not attend the prayer services. They are busy. The monastery accounted for this. Kitchen workers were permitted to say abbreviated prayers while working. The abbreviated prayers took approximately 30 seconds. The bread took 2 hours. God, presumably, understood. The monastery kitchen in 1200 produced food of a quality that would surprise anyone who pictures medieval monastic life as deliberately austere. The fish course alone, mandatory on fast days, which were approximately half the days of the year, required fresh fish, salted fish, smoked fish, dried fish, and pickled fish, prepared in ways that reflected genuine culinary sophistication. The monastery at Ely sat on the edge of the fens, one of the richest fishing grounds in England. The monks ate extremely well. The bread was white, not the coarse brown bread of peasants. White manchet bread made from fine sieved flour that required considerably more effort to produce and considerably more wheat to generate. The ale was brewed on site. Medieval monks consumed approximately a gallon of ale per day, per monk, per day. This was not considered excessive. The water was not safe to drink. The ale was safer. The monks understood this. They brewed accordingly. Here is the reversal that medieval monastic food history forces on anyone who looks at it carefully. The people who took vows of poverty and abstinence from worldly pleasure were the primary culinary innovators of medieval Europe. Not the nobility, not the merchants, the monks. Dom Pérignon, the Benedictine cellarer at the Abbey of Auvillers in France, did not invent champagne. The story that he did is largely mythological, but he did develop significant improvements to the bottling and blending of sparkling wine in the late 17th century. He was a monk. Trappist monks developed most of the strong Belgian ales that now sell for $8 a bottle in airport bars. Cistercian monks developed techniques for aging hard cheese that became the foundation of the European cheese tradition. Benedictine monks at Fécamp developed the herbal liqueur Benedictine in the 16th century. It is still made to the same recipe. You can buy it at any well-stocked liquor store. The label still has a monk on it. The men who gave up wine for God kept making better wine than everyone else. The men who gave up meat kept finding new ways to make fish taste like something you actually wanted to eat. Constraint, it turns out, is an excellent engine for creativity. So is a gallon of ale per day. The monastery kitchen in summer was hot, in a way that deserves specific description rather than general acknowledgement. Multiple open hearths burning continuously. Stone walls that absorbed and retained heat, no ventilation beyond a smoke hole and whatever gap existed under the door. The kitchen staff worked in temperatures that modern occupational health standards would not permit. Burns were routine, not serious burns, routine burns. The kind that happened when you reached into an oven that was not quite cool enough, or splashed yourself with boiling stock, or caught a spark from the fire on an exposed forearm. The monastery infirmary treated burns. It treated them with honey, which is actually an effective antibacterial agent, so medieval burn treatment was not as useless as medieval plague treatment. Progress in some areas was faster than in others. The kitchen staff developed calluses on their hands, thick enough to handle hot pottery that would have burned an untrained person. They developed a particular way of moving around the kitchen that minimized collision with hot surfaces. They developed, over years of work, an immunity to the heat that visitors to the kitchen found remarkable and deeply uncomfortable to observe. The monastery kitchen had its own hierarchy, as rigid as the monastic hierarchy above it. At the top was the kitchener, the monk responsible for overseeing all food production. He did not cook, he managed. He ordered supplies, supervised staff, planned menus, and answered to the prior for anything that went wrong. Below him were the cooks, skilled workers who commanded genuine respect and, in large monasteries, genuine wages. Below them were the kitchen servants, lay workers who performed the physical labor that monks were increasingly reluctant to perform themselves as monastic culture became more comfortable over the 12th century. And at the bottom were the scullions. The scullion's job was to clean everything: the pots, the pans, the floors, the hearths, the tables, the knives, the boards, in cold water, with sand and rushes as abrasives, with hands that were perpetually raw from the combination of cold water, hot residue, and abrasive cleaning materials. The scullion was the lowest status worker in an institution dedicated to humility, which gives you some sense of how low that actually was. Fast days in the medieval church calendar were not occasional inconveniences. They were approximately half the year, every Friday, every Saturday in some traditions, the entire 40 days of Lent, Advent, the vigils before major feast days, various other days depending on the specific monastery's rule and the specific bishop's preferences. On fast days, no meat from four-legged animals, which meant fish, which meant the kitchen staff spent approximately half the year preparing fish in every conceivable form. Fresh fish when available, salted cod, stockfish when fresh was not. Stockfish had to be soaked for several days before it was edible. It smelled during the soaking process like something that had been dead for approximately the amount of time it had actually been dead, which was often several months. The kitchen staff soaked stockfish in large barrels. The barrels were in the kitchen. The kitchen was where people worked all day. Nobody who worked in a medieval monastery kitchen ever forgot what stockfish smelled like while soaking. Nobody who worked there ever stopped smelling it. The monastic obligation of hospitality meant that the kitchen never quite knew how many people it was feeding. The monks were a fixed number. The guests were not. A wealthy patron traveling through required a meal that reflected his status, multiple courses, fine presentation, the kind of food that demonstrated the monastery's quality and encouraged future donations. A group of pilgrims required simple food in quantity. The poor at the monastery gate required whatever was left. What was left was called the dole. The monastery distributed it daily. In large monasteries, the dole fed hundreds of people. The kitchen produced enough food that the leftovers constituted a meaningful social welfare system for the surrounding area. This was not charity in the modern sense. It was a religious obligation. It was also, from a purely logistical standpoint, an enormous amount of extra cooking. The kitchen staff cooked for the monks, the guests, and the poor. In the same kitchen, starting at 4 in the morning, every day. The numbers behind medieval monastic food production are numbers that survive in the account rolls that monasteries kept with impressive thoroughness. Canterbury Cathedral Priory's accounts show annual consumption of approximately 8,000 eggs, several thousand fish, hundreds of gallons of ale, and quantities of spices, pepper, ginger, cinnamon, saffron, that suggest the monastery kitchen was not producing bland food. Saffron was the most expensive spice in medieval Europe. Canterbury used it regularly. The monks who had vowed poverty were eating saffron. The poverty was personal. The institution was wealthy. The distinction mattered to the theologians. It mattered less to the people buying the saffron. The gallon of ale per monk per day across 150 monks meant the brewery produced approximately 550 gallons of ale per week, every week, for centuries. The Benedictines were nothing if not consistent. To survive your day in the medieval monastery kitchen, you would have needed to start before 4 in the morning, work through 8 prayer services you were too busy to attend, cook for monks, guests, pilgrims, and the poor simultaneously, manage the stockfish barrel without losing your sense of smell entirely, and navigate a kitchen hierarchy in which the person above you had the authority to make your day considerably worse, and the theological creativity to classify a beaver as a fish. You would have done all of this in a stone room heated by multiple open fires to temperatures that modern workplace regulations would not permit, with raw hands every day. The monks who ate what you produced went on to invent champagne, Belgian ale, Benedictine liqueur, and the European cheese tradition. Your name is not in the history books. The kitchener's name is sometimes in the account rolls. The scullion's name is not. The beaver is in the history books, technically as a fish. The Pope said so. Who were you to argue?